later, that will allow me to sync that up to this. And it'll look and sound awesome.
You're right.
Adam, do you have your thingy-majigger written out?
No, I didn't. I didn't do that the last couple of times. I think I might be able to remember finally after 20-some episodes.
Yeah, so we'll go through it'll be a musical intro. We'll talk news real quick, and then I'll introduce you in, and we'll go from there. And we'll just wing the whole thing. That's what we always do.
Okay.
Like I said, it's laid back. It's
loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
I'm not, but hopefully y'all can fill in the spaces.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do to offend us or our viewers.
I bet if I tried, but I won't do so.
I don't know. You can what? You gonna do that randomly? Just gonna smile weirdly in that direction?
Yes.
You're gonna make a joke and look at the camera.
I'm not gonna make a joke. He's gonna be talking
the
about
camera in anybody's face, and they start changing their behavior.
He's gonna be talking about moral foundation theory.
You're like,
I don't know. I've never been recorded before.
Never.
Don't look at the camera.
Don't acknowledge. Pretend it's not there, dude.
I don't know. Maybe. So okay, yeah, Adam. Whenever you're ready, I suppose.
Moral foundations and useful diversions.
Yeah, I think we're good. We're good. Whatever.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Ancap Barber Shop. This episode, we have Alan Barksdale joining us, and we're talking about moral foundations and useful diversions. Episode 22 begins now.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Ancap Barber Shop, your source for libertarianism and anarchy. Now for your hosts, the inimitable, the legendary Adam Brown, and of course yours truly, Scott McDonald, the Ancap Barber.
If I was ever to kill myself, I'd go out with a show. I'd hang my nails cords on the seaboard down the road. I'd leave my mangy body there for all eyes to see. Then they know God hated me. Now I've been faithful man.
All right, we are here. We are back. Oh, whoa. That makes more sense. Sorry, I'm grabbing the wrong thingies over here. But yeah, we're here. It is episode 22 of the Ancap Barber Shop. Double deuces, and we're gonna talk about some stuff today. Are you here, Adam?
I am here.
You are here.
I wasn't here the last thing we put out with the bonus episode.
Yeah, that's right. You weren't. Yeah, I got to interview Mr. Seth Green of Greener Pastures, and that was a really good talk. If anybody hasn't seen that, go check it out right now. That was our second bonus episode. And but yeah, today we're gonna get into some philosophy type stuff, and we have a guest. We're gonna bring him out here in just a minute. But real quick, we're just gonna jump into some fast news stuff. So something interesting that is going on in the Bitcoin world. Everybody's known about this, this fork that's just happened, and the creation of Bitcoin Cash, and Coinbase originally made it very, very clear that they weren't going to be supporting, trading with Bitcoin Cash, right? They were going to go where the market went. And so they issued a statement I'm going to read. In the case of Bitcoin Cash, we made clear to our customers that we did not feel we could safely support it on the day it was launched. For customers who wanted immediate access to their Bitcoin Cash, we advised them to withdraw their Bitcoin from the Coinbase platform. However, there are several points we want to make clear for our customer. Both Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash remain safely stored on Coinbase. Customers with balances of Bitcoin at the time of the fork now have an equal quantity of Bitcoin Cash stored by Coinbase. We operate by the general principle that our customers should benefit to the greatest extent possible from hard forks or other unexpected events. Over the last several days, we've examined all of the relevant issues and have decided to work on adding support for Bitcoin Cash for Coinbase customers. Ooh, okay. We made this decision based on factors such as the security of the network, customer demand, trading volumes, and regulatory considerations. We are, I don't know what comes into, it's just, okay, people got really pissed off. And I think the big thing is like, okay, are you going to support, are you going to support Bitcoin Cash? Like, whatever. But all the people that do have that, all the people that have their Bitcoin in the custodial Coinbase wallet are realizing that they're missing out, or they think they are. So them saying, yeah, okay, look, your BCC is safe in here. We're going to take care of you. Once supported, customers will be able to withdraw. Oh, I'm sorry. We are planning to have support for Bitcoin Cash by January 1st, 2018, assuming no additional risks emerge during that time, which they very well could. It could, it could wither and die. Once supported, customers will be able to withdraw Bitcoin Cash. We'll make a determination at a later date about adding trading support. In the meantime, customer Bitcoin Cash will remain safely stored on Coinbase. They wouldn't have survived if they hadn't done that.
If they hadn't adjusted.
Well,
yeah.
okay, they would have taken a big hit,
Right.
Because
a lot of the people who use Bitcoin are libertarian-minded people, right? And they want to use it for microtransactions and things like that. They were the ones who wanted Bitcoin Cash to be a thing, right? So,
well, anybody that realizes that, hey, I have money, like even if you don't care for Bitcoin Cash, like you have that, you can take it and you can sell it and you can get, Bitcoin Classic or whatever it's called, Bitcoin Core. That's what it is, the original Bitcoin. But yeah, so that's good news. Now, at the end of the day, they still hold your keys. You don't know what's going to happen. The best thing you can do in general is get into a non-custodial wallet.
right. I did like you said and got a Jax wallet, and it doesn't support Bitcoin Cash, at least not yet.
Oh, it will. I mean, but the important thing is you said you had some Bitcoin on a Coinbase account and you couldn't get it out in time or something, but you should likely be okay.
Well, if I wait till it supports, I don't know.
You don't have to wait till it supports it. I mean, you can do whatever you want in the meantime.
I know. Yeah, whatever. Doesn't matter. I'll figure it out one day.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But is there anything else news related? I know that it seems like there's been a lot going on, but
I don't know. I usually trust you for the news.
Oh,
now that you
well.
bring all that to the table.
honestly, the past couple of days, it's funny. Right after this a day or two after, I was paying attention. I haven't over the weekend. I've been stuck in my own world. I haven't been paying attention. So hopefully, Bitcoin Cash is still a thing.
Right on. Yeah.
We'll find out. So I'll listen to some Free Talk Live, and somebody will fill me in at some point if my Bitcoin is worthless. But we have a guest with us today, Mr. Alan Barksdale, Secretary of the Madison County Libertarian Party. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing fine.
And we're going to talk about moral foundation theory. What is it now? Moral foundations?
Well, it's moral foundation and social intuitionism. I am no expert, but it's something I'm interested in, and I thought you would be too.
Well, take it away. What you got?
Well, as is true of many libertarians, I came to it fairly young, read, as in the title of the famous book, it usually begins with Ayn Rand. I was never an objectivist.
Right.
I was I was a catechumen. Somebody was studying it, but didn't actually go all the way.
A catechumen. I haven't
That's
heard
new to
that
me, yeah.
before.
That's early Christianity. Somebody who was learning how to do it.
Okay.
I'm being subtly insulting to the objectivists. I hope they don't mind.
That's fine. I'm like a moral relativist.
Many
and
of
stuff,
my
so.
best friends are objectivists, and I greatly admire Ayn Rand.
Yeah, if you want to have libertarian friends, then yes.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, you have to appreciate people for what they are.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't mean you have to entirely agree with them. Anyway, that's a bit of a digression, but nevertheless, not entirely though, because Ms. Rand, and part of the reason I brought this up, tried to base libertarian ideas on a very objective philosophical foundation, and so have a good many other folks. Indeed, libertarians in general tend to be really logical people. In fact, I'll get to that a little bit later. But one thing I've noticed is, as many of us have, I, armed with my powerful arguments, talk to people who are intelligent folks, and it just goes right past their heads.
Yes.
And furthermore, if I am not feeling charitable, and if they are not feeling charitable, we start acting like the other person must be evil or crazy or stupid.
Well, you're not yelling at them loud enough.
Yes, exactly.
That's the problem.
And I don't have my hands on their lapels and my hair written on fire. And I've just wondered about that. And interestingly enough, some social psychologists have tried to study something of that issue. In fact, one of the major ones, the ones whose book had the most influence on me, a guy named Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist currently at NYU, that was actually part of his inspiration, was seeing polarized Americans and saying, why are they like that? People who, by a Martian standard, are far more alike than they're different, and by most human standards are nice enough folks, yet they hate each other, at least so it seems. And what led me into this was the fact that people associated with Professor Haidt, folks who study moral foundations and social intuitionism, which I'll again get to in a moment, are among the first people who tried to study the psychology of libertarians, American-style libertarians. They paid attention to us. And y'all may or may not know, but there is a whole genre, particularly the last couple of decades, and it's a sign of the polarization I mentioned, among social psychologists to diagnose what's wrong with people who aren't progressive liberals. You may have read some of this stuff out there, but it's been widely reported, as you might expect, in the mainstream medium about all the things that are wrong with people who are not the sort of people
what caused the divergence from reason.
Yes, exactly. And Mr. Haidt's Professor Haidt's activities and those of his associates, as far as I can tell, were not aimed at that. They're actually trying to understand what was going on. And reading that and led me into the more general theory that that these folks are promoting. As many people have said, and I can't remember which famous one started it, to man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
So I don't want to act like this is the be-all and end-all. However, I found it illuminating, and it actually changed the way I see the world, which if you're a person who reads a lot and are past 50 and are sort of an intellectual type, that doesn't happen very often.
Right.
So I was a little excited about this. And so I'll just talk the basics of the theory as I understand it.
Yeah. And so the old dog learns a new trick, and that's great. But so, if you could give us some sort of outline as far as like your definition of what we're talking, because it's all still very
very
to
vague.
me.
Very vague, yeah. But I brought up the bit about people talking past each other because that was what drove me to be interested in it, what drove Professor Haidt to be interested in this.
Right.
What's when you're talking about something, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then it makes the whole thing a lot more interesting. So a little bit of background on the one theory is, and this is or one part of it, and this is the metaphor Professor Haidt uses, is an idea that is anathema and probably doesn't even occur to a lot of us libertarian-oriented people, and that is the idea that maybe we're not entirely driven by reason. Maybe, we think all those other people, they're driven by emotion or what their church told them to or their parents told them. No, we've thought it through from the beginning and from an objective basis. And Haidt and Company suggests that for most of that's not true, that in general, we have moral intuitions. We have feelings about what's good and what's bad, and then, as it were, translate that into our opinions about specific issues. And then our reason is largely aimed at rationalizing this, if we're reasonable sorts of people, and at persuading other people that we're right. This connects to if you're familiar with evolutionary psychology, a phrase associated with that, which is brains evolved for fitness, not truth.
Okay. I'm not. You said you're familiar with evolutionary psychology? Well, no. And B, that is hilarious.
That is a whole
and makes a lot of sense.
That's a whole entertaining other field, and I won't go into it, although it overlaps actually with what I was wanting to talk about. And I recommend looking that up if you're curious. That is our reason seems more, one way of interpreting our reason, it's more a way to try to move other people in our direction and also to try to explain ourselves to other people so that they'll think we're okay. It's we rationalize to ourselves whatever it is we've decided more or less subconsciously that this is right and good.
Right.
And we try to make other people think the same thing. Haidt uses the metaphor of a fellow sitting on the back of an elephant. The elephant does what it feels like it's doing.
Right.
And then the guy comes up, well, I meant it to do that. And maybe occasionally he can bump the elephant a little bit and change it, but not that much.
Right.
That is, as it were, the metaphor for this. From there, they're trying to look at, so can you quantify this? Is there a way of figuring out what these intuitions are? What is it that motivates people to think something is good or bad? And then come up with these enormous and very complex rationalizations for why this is good and why this is bad.
Almost like you're asking, what are the foundations for building morality?
Ah, yes, yes, very good.
Now it's coming together.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. And here we face, let's see, I'm trying to remember the name of the logical fallacy. I forgot it for the moment. But basically, the fact that you name something doesn't mean it's real. The reification fallacy, I believe that's what it is.
Okay.
I mean, we come up with names like, let's see, truth or beauty, or but what is truth? As somebody famous once said.
Right.
What is beauty? Who is the good person? What do we mean by good? We come up with these names, but unless we can actually relate them to something, it is not part of the basis of reality. But we have to name things in order to talk about them.
Right.
We have to impose a order on reality. We have to make categories. There is, as it were, an imperative to have categories.
Right.
And little Kantian joke right there, categorical imperative. Since you were saying, actually, I'm not talking philosophy, but since you did, I decided to throw in a philosophy joke.
That is funny because one of my very, very good friends, Pat, is always going on about Kant, and I'll have to make sure to tell him to listen to this.
But one of Kant's basic ideas was that there's a blooming, buzzing confusion, as another philosopher said, in the reality, and we have to impose order on it, and we impose categories to talk about it.
Right.
And then he drew from that a whole lot of other things, which I'm not sure I agree with. But anyway, the categories that the social psychologists that I'm talking about, and these are, by social psychologists, that's a subdivision of psychology where you're trying to study how does human society is affected by human psychology,
Okay.
which overlaps with all sorts of things, but these guys come at it from a psychology angle. And so what they were doing was saying, okay, we want to quantify this stuff. So they tried out a bunch of different ideas, and if you read Haidt's book aimed at the general public on this, which I've got right in front of me, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. Hence, you see the thing that bothered him that got him interested in the subject. Although this is more of a theory, but it was theory driven, as most theories are, not by a what would you call it, pure reason or pure desire for knowledge. Somebody wanted to do something. The apple hits on Newton's head, and he wonders, why did that happen in exactly the way it did?
Yeah.
Though, of course, you present it as if it came out of nowhere.
Yeah, there's an ends before there is a means.
Yeah. So anyway, the ideas, the divisions they came up with were, and I'll list them. They came up with 6, although they played around a bit, and these should not be taken as the basis for all humanity, for all of human belief. It's just this is the best thing they could come up with. These were the best categories they could impose upon the blooming, buzzing confusion of the human mind.
Right.
And these were care versus harm. That is, how strongly do you feel about caring people and protecting them from harm? Another one is 6 of them. So I won't go on forever.
Right.
Fairness versus cheating, and this is after they'd worked with it a while. They were defining this more about proportionality, not fairness in the cosmic sense, but if you do something bad, getting something bad in return, and vice versa. Another one, liberty versus oppression. Hooray for us libertarians!
Of course, we're going to jump on that one.
Yeah, and and that is mainly conceived of in the libertarian sense of not being forced by threats of violence or physical force to do something or
And
not do
that's
something.
probably the foundation that kind of keeps like authority in check, right?
Well, yes, it is. And you are anticipating things I'm going to get to. So
I'm going to stop talking.
No, you should. It shows you're thinking these things through. I'm positively impressed. Giving people a foretaste of what is to come. Another one's loyalty versus betrayal. How do you feel? And all of these things are feelings. How do you feel about loyalty towards something versus betrayal of it?
Yeah, this is getting right down to the bottom. So it is all going to be very primal and
these are emotions these are the elephant that you later that bubbles up into you coming up with a reason for why you did something or why you think this is right or wrong. Another one is authority versus subversion. That is, how do you feel about the necessity and importance of submission to legitimate authority? Another one is sanctity versus degradation. And this, interestingly enough, it crosses over in our heads because this is very deep stuff between our feelings of physical cleanliness and you call religious cleanliness and even moral cleanliness.
Right.
Cleanliness is next to godliness is not just a sort of a way to keep your kid to wash behind his ears. It is the way in which many people feel,
right?
And libertarians may not, but an interesting point about this is that what they did is they went and asked people questions, made questionnaires to try to see what are the relative importance that people assign to these 6 moral foundations, are really psychological tendencies. Everybody feels them to some degree, but it's the relative feeling of it. How much are you feeling care versus harm versus liberty or oppression? Which is more important to you? And came up with various questionnaires, which if you go to, I believe it's called yourmorals.org, you can participate, I believe. Still, got thousands of people putting stuff in and answering questions.
Really?
And so you can help provide data. If they're still doing, I should have checked beforehand. But in any event, good, interesting stuff there. And they got some really interesting results. One of them is, and Haidt doesn't emphasize this, but I thought it was really cool, is that based on people's relative feelings about these various moral foundations, you can predict with a great deal of accuracy, particularly in a relatively free country as the U.S., what their political point of view is. That is, the relative mix of these things will tell you probably which way they are. And being a pragmatic-minded American, I'm thinking, can use this to filter out the people who may or may not listen to my message.
Right.
Haidt doesn't talk about that, but I can imagine some political advertiser thinking, very interesting, very interesting. And so he and his associates were trying to see what are associated with particular political points of view. And the reason why I found this particularly interesting, because it did fit fairly well with my own personal experience. And of course, that by itself is not a whole lot of shouldn't put a whole lot of weight on that.
Yeah, it's one very small data point.
But of course it fits my intuition about this.
Yeah, exactly. It confirms your bias.
And
as well as mine. I assume.
Exactly. So in any event, one thing he found was, and this is not surprising, and this gets into the thing that first brought me to it. A friend of mine who's since dropped out of sight, I won't mention his name because I think that might have been on purpose.
Right.
He also may have died. I really can't tell. Is the psychology of libertarians. And what they found was, just like you would expect, libertarians really are different from other people. Self-identified American libertarians, in general, are ridiculously strong, are ridiculously high prioritized on the liberty versus oppression. Pretty much low on everything else.
Right.
To some degree, everybody, another interesting constant among all humans is the fairness versus cheating, in the sense of proportionality. Most folks don't like free riders. Most folks don't like
Right.
thieves. That one, libertarians are fairly strong on that, just like everybody seems to be. But on everything else, libertarians are weak. We just are, if you look at it from that point of view, or we're not encumbered by our desire for
Right.
liberty above all, because we're right and liberty is more important than everything else.
Yeah.
And all the other people, as we might feel, are crazy or evil or stupid because their priorities are not the same as ours.
That's really interesting. So okay. So the liberty aspect, of course, is really high, and then what was the other one you just
Fairness,
said?
cheating,
cheating.
is a
Right,
and all the other ones-
and that's where the free rider thing. 'Cause that's interesting because I think of things that we have to explain and we talk about like in an anarcho-capitalist society, like if people are voluntarily paying for defense, like the people that aren't paying, they're not voluntarily paying, they're reaping the benefit. I would look at that and I go like, who cares? Like, yeah, I'm not gonna pay, and I guess in that scenario, defense is a different thing. We're not necessarily talking about just going and murdering people overseas, but like whatever, dude. I can't help it that I reap that reward. But yeah, we really put that stuff under a microscope.
Right.
So yeah, that's interesting. That those are the two big ones.
Yeah, well, by far the liberty one, and at least not almost nothing the way the others are. I'll mention in this context something I used to talk to my non-libertarian friends about when the certain hot button subjects come up, like flag burning. And they talk about all sorts of things about freedom of expression and about, no, we must protect America. Sanctity, remember? Sanctity versus an
Right.
authority.
Right.
Loyalty, it's betrayal of America versus those who are in favor of what they consider freedom of expression and not really caring. And hey, it doesn't hurt anybody, so who cares? And the libertarian me asks, who owns that piece of cloth?
Yeah,
Right.
that's like
Yeah.
we don't care about the symbolism. There's no emotional attachment. That's
Exactly,
a perfect
yeah.
example of that, and that's what I was just thinking is for us just like, yeah, whose flag is it? Oh, it's your flag. Oh, yeah,
Burn
yeah,
it
go
down.
ahead.
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah.
I don't
maybe,
care. It's not mine.
Are you burning it in an area where it's going to set off a fire that hurts somebody else because you're burning it close to somebody else's property that'll set on fire? Something like
Are there plastic fibers that if I inhale the smoke, it could potentially give me cancer in
Right.
20 years?
If you're in California
Yeah.
where there's wildfire problems, maybe
Barring
it's a bad idea.
those aggressions, yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
absolutely.
But to many people, to the middle of the bones, that's weird, really weird.
Yeah,
It's-
It's weird that I say it's weird. It's strange to me that it's considered weird because
Yeah.
it seems so logical and obvious and straightforward to
Yeah.
me, right? Who owns it can do what they want with it. But it's
Yeah.
weird that it seems that we're in the minority on
It
that.
seems that the position
because
of
if going by the social intuition theory,
Right.
we're the weird folks who emphasize the liberty oppression aspect, and for that reason, we have rationalized reasons why that's right, and the others, they aren't too important.
right.
To somebody who's a big part of their identity as a person is, I am an American. I love my country, and this is just absolutely horrible. No matter where you do it,
Right.
they're going to feel differently about it. Another of the interesting aspects of this, and I mentioned libertarians because, hey, we're libertarians. And,
Right.
and for once, somebody's actually paying attention to us. Actually, you can actually search on HAIDT, and I forgot his co-writer, and Libertarian Psychology, and find the original paper, along with statistics that led to this. Because this wasn't just somebody blowing smoke. This is what they got when they try. I mean, they had people take the test. They
did actual study.
yeah,
So-
they have actual data on this stuff. Another interesting one is what are the ones that liberals, American modern liberals?
Right.
I know we're classical liberals, we're the
Right.
real liberals, whatever.
Yeah.
American modern liberals, what people mostly mean by that, and what they found was that the way it worked there is they were pretty mediocre on loyalty and betrayal, authority and subversion. Looking up to the state as daddy's telling me what to do and that's the right thing to do. I'm
Right.
sorry, I shouldn't say it that way because I'm showing disrespect for my fellow Americans who feel differently.
It's okay.
Well, I don't know. I'm trying. This is one of the things that's changed about me. I'm trying to be more understanding of different people who are different. In Sanctity, Degradation, they just tend not to be too bothered by it. The things they're really heavy on: care versus harm, as you might expect. Liberty versus oppression, not as nearly as much as a libertarian, but they're higher than, that's one of their higher ones, and the fairness cheating aspect. So if a liberal is presented with something that they feel, that at some intuitive level they feel is going to prevent people from coming to harm or care for them, they're probably going to privilege that, if I may use that as a verb.
Right.
And we're speaking English. We can, if Shakespeare can say, "How dukes it?" How does he duke it? And talking about how well the local duke is acting, I can say this. To them, the priorities, their priority will be, obviously I'm oversimplifying, but they're going to feel and then construct all sorts of rationalizations on top of it on why it is necessary to override other things in order to care for folks whom they feel are badly off. Now, they may be mistaken as to how badly off the person is, and there's all sorts of signaling aspects to it, but that's the basic concept. One thing I'm surprised Haidt doesn't do is quote one of my favorite quotes from Samuel Johnson. This is the one, the Life of Johnson, wrote the first good dictionary in English, and as David Friedman, in a book I will plug since we're plugging, my favorite anarcho-capitalist book, Machinery of Freedom.
I'm reading that right now.
Ah, very good.
That's I own that book. I love that book. I love David Friedman.
As an aside, I think in the back in the section I think it's in the section amusingly titled "My Competition," talking about other books. I think that's the one where he talks about how some of his students were reading essays by, I'm getting off the subject, I'm sorry, but I just love this.
Go to town.
How they were reading some essays that Samuel Johnson wrote in the 1750s. He said, this stuff is so, it's written in a formal style, but this is really old. Why don't we understand it? And he said, well, it's because Samuel Johnson largely determined what standard English is back in the 1750s.
Because he was talking some crazy slang that sounds normal to us now.
Because, well, he wrote essays that were much liked and were imitated by others, even if they aren't read too much now, which they should be. And also he wrote the first really good, almost all by himself, the first really good dictionary of English back in the 1770s, which was the standard English dictionary, except among English speakers, and was a major influence in Noah Webster too. But it was the most respected one up till the Oxford English Dictionary started being created more than a century later.
So a modern equivalent of that, just to put it into perspective, imagine the most urban ghetto. It doesn't matter if they're white or black. We're not talking race, but your friend that talks like
The hippest slang.
The hippest slang.
Yeah.
Okay, so that guy decides how we're going to talk for the next 200 years.
He was on the spear point, right? He was driving
And that
modern language.
that brings us to, did you ever see the movie Idiocracy?
Yes.
In the future,
fantastic movie.
oh my god, we should watch that soon.
Yeah.
In the future, everybody basically talks like a mixture of redneck NASCAR fan and like urban ghetto drug dealer.
Ebonics, yeah.
It's so funny.
And I'm sorry I brought that up because I digressed, and that is one of my
We're
besetting,
pros.
I'm one of my
at that.
besetting sins. I think
Don't
of something
worry.
interesting and I go off to the side. In any event, Dr. Johnson once said, you cannot argue a man out of something he wasn't argued into.
Right. I like that because that's something we talked about before. Is the idea of like where your thoughts are even authored from? It's like I like the analogy too of the writing on the elephant. We don't 100% determine what authors are thoughts. They're predetermined. But
And the implication here is that it is often emotion rather than reason, right?
Right. Now, they're not saying, again, it's a fairly good metaphor in that the guy on the back of the elephant can occasionally, he can bump the elephant and may be persuaded in certain directions,
Sure.
but it's mostly what the elephant decides, what the guy on top does, and then he just has to figure out a way to justify it or rationalize it.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, it's modern liberals they put a lot of effort into liberty, but they sort of take away from that and to stress even more so the caring, right? So that's
Right, that if it comes one or the other, they'll come down on the caring side.
right.
But that they're more interested in that than the other areas. Now, that leads to the third one, and this was one that managed to get Haidt, who, by the way, is as he says, a conventional lefty professor. He's just one of those rare people who's willing to think, the other guy might not be evil or crazy or stupid. People are to be valued because they're very rare in all fields. And that was conservatives. And the conservatives are interesting. When folks hear about this, libertarians seem to say, "Yeah, right. That's exactly what we are."
Yeah.
Liberals say, "What do you mean? We're not just limited folks." Conservatives, though, based on, in general, I'm talking American-style conservatives, self-identified, they generally fit into roughly equal amounts in all three of those, in all six of those fields. That is roughly equal in all of them. And this actually leads to something I've seen. I try to get a bunch of different points of view when I'm reading online. So I regularly will look at National Review and American Conservative, Reason, a Libertarian magazine, several lefty magazines like Slate and Salon and so forth, and Mother Jones. And one thing the conservatives types like to say is that conservatives think and I don't think this is always true. They're being a little self-justifying, but there's enough truth to it. I think it's worth repeating. The conservatives think that the liberals are mistaken. Liberals think the conservatives are evil and wrong. The reason they give for this is, and I said I don't think that's entirely true, certainly in our current level of polarization. But the point he's making is that generally conservatives have some understanding of what the liberal or the libertarian is saying. That is, they can understand, care is important. Liberty in the sense of not being forced to do something by other people is important. But when they're deciding things, they tend to decide them also based on feelings of, is this showing loyalty to what should be loyal, or is it betraying it?
Right.
Is it showing proper respect for legitimate authority? Is it degrading, not just in the sense of, ooh, how ugly and sickly, is this degrading the nobility of the human spirit by behaving in a particular way? That is, humans are a certain thing, are a certain being, and most conservatives, even the non-religious ones, have they may think, particularly the religious ones, that humans are below God, but they're just a little below the angels, and that they are supposed to aspire to greater things. And acting in certain ways is it's wrong. It's because it's even if the person themselves is so morally blind they can't see it, they're making the world and themselves worse off by degrading themselves by doing certain things. And you can talk to a conservative to find out what those certain things are. And actually, it's worth doing that because people who have that sort of emotion, it may be different. It's partly culturally determined. You talk to a conservative in America versus a conservative in Pakistan, you won't get the same answers.
Right.
And these sort of predictive abilities, they work, but it works within the context of a particular culture. So a person, So a person who has these, if you did it in Pakistan or in France or something like that, and started asking people these same sort of questions, you would get groups of people that have different sets of priorities, but it wouldn't necessarily map to exactly the same sort of politics it would in America. Similar, but not the same. So that was a very interesting interpretation of it. And it was, I actually saw this happening in real life a little bit. I was giving a summary of Haidt's and the other guy's social intuitionism work to an intelligent liberal friend, and it was her response was, "Unfortunately, I don't think I presented it very well, and if you do it in short form, folks aren't going to be very receptive." It was,
Right.
She started reciting references to the most evil conservatives you can think of, because that's all conservatives are the most evil conservatives, obviously.
And libertarians are just those guys, but they want to smoke weed.
Yeah, exactly. And liberals are a bunch of commies who I don't know, want to.
Snowflakes.
Yeah, that's the current one.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Or they want to put a gun to your head so that you don't go to church, or something along those lines.
Of course, there's no in between any of those.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are the only three types of people.
But those are the ones you think about. And so she wouldn't have anything to do with those conservatives. And
Right.
then I tell a little bit about this to a conservative friend, and he says, "Well, that's just, I don't think he got it right. He's wrong."
New Age
Yeah.
malarkey.
Yeah, exactly. It's there's right and there's wrong, and that's just the way it is.
Right.
The another interesting aspect of it is, and Haidt lays considerable emphasis on this, is and he goes a little bit into the evolutionary psychology point of view, basic insight evolutionary psychology, to the degree, back when it was called sociobiology, a lot of people hated it, but its founder, by the way, E.O. Wilson, one of the most distinguished scientists ever produced by Alabama, specialty ants. He's the big ant man of the world. But generalizing from ants and animal ethology in general came up with what sociobiology, which is the general approach evolutionary psychology is applying it to human. Basic insight is insofar, important qualification here, insofar as human psychology and human behavior, or animal behavior, which is ethology, science of behavior.
Okay.
Our word ethics comes from it. Insofar as it's affected by natural selection, the behavior is the behavior that's most likely to lead to the genes of the folks who have those behaviors being passed on to subsequent generation. It's the same basic insight as natural selection in general.
Okay.
If, to the degree that any particular trait is inherited, those traits that cause more offspring to survive into the next generation and in subsequent generations are on average going to be selected for. And so the thought is, okay, these characteristics, to the degree that and this is getting in more into a speculative phase, these characteristics I've just described, okay, what's the purpose of them all? And in particular, the whole religion one, because that's a really interesting one for everybody, including Darwin, who was thinking about it, because people spent a lot of effort on religion and have in just about all known societies. So the point there is, and he in the book, he talks about all of these things and gives pretty interesting theories for all of them. Some of it may even be testable. I don't know enough about it. So I'm not going to even talk about going into it here. He talks particularly, though, about religion, about the ones that his most likely audience, which is his fellow generally lefty academic audience, are likely to wonder about: the loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, sanctity, and degradation. Why in the world? What's the usefulness of this? We have these all the so-called new atheists like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins, who and I forgot Christopher. I can't remember the other
Hitchens.
Kitchens, yes.
Hitchens.
Yeah. You have all these guys, saying, religion useless, et cetera, et cetera. Not just useless, but evil. Professor Haidt, well, he's not particularly religious, and he's a lefty academic, so he may feel it, but he says, okay. But nevertheless, just about every human society has this stuff in a big way. What's gives here, boys? What's going on? So the idea they came up with is that these things help the miracle of human cooperation in large-scale societies. It is really, if you think about it, it is really interesting how in the world can you organize large-scale societies? Now, obviously, we libertarians understand the importance of trade and
property rights.
And property, but the insights associated particularly with Friedrich Hayek. Another plug: the use of knowledge in society. It's one of those. If you want to read something that's one of the major reasons a guy got a Nobel Prize, and that's actually understandable by the average person.
Yeah, that's good for me.
I will recommend to you an essay you can find easily online, The Use of Knowledge in Society by Friedrich Hayek. Unfortunately, like most things Hayek wrote, it's too long-winded. You could cut it in half and still have the same stuff there, but there's almost no math, and it's understandable if you apply yourself.
Right.
And it's also really, and I'm a software guy who also studied economics, and I'll say that it's actually inspirations for bottom-up artificial intelligence as well. But it's the idea that a lot of the organization and knowledge in the world is at the level of not people from above who couldn't even understand how to organize a complex society. It's beyond human comprehension. It's the interaction of the people at the lower level who know how to do things and interact with people using things like money and property and desire to make a profit and so forth, which motivates them in such a way to make use of resources in a productive way. And we could go on into that. But part of what allows all that is, in Haidt's view, and particularly in the earlier sorts of societies where you didn't have a strong state that could enforce the rule of law, and you didn't have a bunch of enlightened people, as we like to think we are, who could, as you were telling me recently at PorkFest, Scott and Adam, could leave your valuable vegetable products on your table and just walk away.
Exactly.
But-
Your drugs, your silver, your money.
Whatever.
Nobody's going to mess with it because the vast majority of those people, are they believe in this culture of consent, right?
Yeah.
Is the way that I describe it. But and then the small amount of people that don't believe that know that everybody else does, and everybody there has guns. So
Yeah.
it all works out very well.
And of course, they don't want to cheat, and they don't want to betray their strong commitment that anybody at PorkFest probably has to a libertarian society.
Right.
It'd just be dirty if they did that, don't you think?
Yeah,
They would
yeah.
degrade them.
Especially during like the most holy of sacraments at PorkFest, you're gonna be that libertarian that goes and robs somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
A dick.
Any event, his thought is that particularly in pre-industrial societies, which oddly enough are the societies where religion are strongest. Interesting. That in those sort of societies, things like religion are helpful in organizing people's behavior. The thought that, for example, God or the gods will be watching you or will do something if you take that guy's stuff is helpful. There's one of the favorite examples, although this one's a bit of an extreme one, were the water temples of a certain part of Indonesia, where in order to organize the utterly necessary irrigation for the rice paddies without a central authority, there was an elaborate religion system where the goddesses at the temples, major temple at the top of the watercourse, minor temples at each connection of the irrigation ditches that go to separate families' plots.
Right.
The priests knew the proper way to do it, and you didn't want the goddesses against you if you didn't, and they organized it very well. Now, the societies created this way we may not always like, but on the other hand, the civilized societies did tend to beat the other guys.
Because they were all working towards a common goal.
Right, and they could have armies and things like that. As is often pointed out, the Romans were fighting were generally in considerably bigger and in better health than they were. Your average Roman guy, and indeed any pre-industrial average person, is not going to be eating as well as a hunter-gatherer in a good year. Your average Germanic warrior was a guy nearly 6 feet tall and considerably heavier than your 5 foot tall Roman guy, who is nevertheless working far better organized with better weapons and with better, and of course with logistics trained. We all
Knew
know
how
that.
to make a phalanx or whatever.
Yeah, and had the logistics trained. Remember, that's the big
Yeah.
deal. People neglected. Could beat them. Anyway, so that's a taste of the sort of thing they're talking about. He emphasized that one mainly because, as I said, it would go against the prejudices of the lefties he's talking to. And sure enough, if you read the reviews, they does. That way he managed to annoy both the new atheist type, Sam Harris in particular, and also to annoy a bunch of his lefty friends.
Right.
So that's and didn't get too many friends except for a fellow who wrote what was it called? Thank God for Evolution, who is, I believe, something of an outlier among devout Christians. But
Really?
there is a book by that subject, by the way. But that guy liked it. So fun stuff, and I'm just giving you my briefly stated partial interpretation of the social intuition theory. So, okay, great. It gives you a better understanding of the world, and at least inspired me to have better understanding, or try to be a little less, I hope, liable to think that guy is crazy or evil or stupid. Oh, and I should add how Haidt actually, one of the things that got Haidt into this, one of them was his worry about the polarization of modern America. And it's an interesting question how that's happened and to what degree. But another one was that he was went to a very traditional, he went and stayed with some very traditional people in India and lived with them for a while. And their attitudes toward women, their attitudes toward how you should treat old folks, their attitudes for how you could treat servants were just anathema. Well, not in the case of old folks. It was more like, well, yeah, I wish we were like that. But anyway, it was just entirely contrary to a guy who was brought up as an upper middle class lefty in Massachusetts.
Right, of course.
And who went on to be a professor of social psychology in a college in social sciences, whereas we know the lefty to non-lefty ratio is generally somewhere in the area of 8 to 10 to 1, depending on the particular field.
Yeah.
Yet, if you looked at him and said, these people are not bad folks.
Right.
They're people like me, and it's not just they're deluded, they have lives that are meaningful to them, and they seem okay. I don't like it, but I should understand this better.
Yeah, and in that same vein, anytime you guys are like arguing with somebody, especially on the internet where you don't have that human to human connection, and you know people are more liable to threaten your life and shit like that because they don't have to back it up. Try to keep in mind that that person likely has the same goals as you do, at least as far, or maybe not like the same life goals, but they like want everybody to have stuff and be happy the same way you do, that you just disagree about the means. Like, so these people aren't just evil people, right?
Or stupid or crazy. Yeah, you're talking the Ransberger pivot, as libertarians call it.
Okay.
Promoted by a guy named Ransberger, whose major activity, or whose major point is that when you're trying to persuade somebody of somebody, and I'm pretty sure Haidt would agree, although he'd go beyond this, is that you should try to find the areas which you agree on, which if you're Americans, you probably, and most other people, but if you come from the same cultural background, what you want to see is probably not too different on regard to kids getting educated and the country being defended, et cetera. It's what's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And in fact, you are really thinking ahead here. No, it shows you're following what's going on, and maybe Mr. Haidt's not crazy, or maybe he's actually he's a libertarian and he doesn't know it, and so he's just thinking the same way we do. So that's why it makes sense. In fact, one of the activities that the people associated with social intuitionism has come up with, I mentioned that yourmorals.org. Another one is worth checking out. It's a fairly small site, civilpolitics.org. What they're doing was trying to say, what are the things we need to do? What can we do in order to have people not agree with each other? Haidt, et cetera, don't think that we should all be agreeing with each other. Don't think it's possible. I long ago reached that conclusion.
Sure.
I mean, I thought when I was a kid, this makes so much sense to me. Once they understand it, everybody will be a libertarian. And I figured out over time, that's just not going to happen because people, it just doesn't make sense to some folks. But they're talking about how can we, as they put it, argue more productively. And they give a few ideas here. One of them is just try to have the insights you might get from social intuitionism. Another are specific things you can do. And one of them is exactly what you're talking about. Okay. And that is try to treat people as other humans, but if possible, try to set up situations where you can't separate yourself out from the other person and be like your flamer on the internet.
Right.
There actually are organizations that have, in a few places, tried to bring together people of different points of view and get them to talk to each other on a human level. It seems sad to think that you need to do that with Americans, but nevertheless, do that, given the current degree of polarization. Haidt made an interesting point. He thinks that Congress would work better if, as started being done back in the 80s, partly because of the, he didn't say this, but I believe it's partly because of the airline deregulation, for which we should remember the big deregulation started under Jimmy Carter as a semi-monopolistic or oligopolistic area, or what shall I call it? policy.
Okay.
That's something, and that's something, as many people have pointed out, libertarians and some conservatives, the more free market ones, and a good many liberals can work on, is anti-crony capitalism,
Okay.
opposed to the regulations that used to make it so that you couldn't put in a new trucking line or route in a particular area unless the FCC went along, or not the FCC, not the Federal Communications Commission? I can't remember the name now. Thank goodness.
Department of Transportation?
No, one Department of Transportation. It was another federal agency that determined, it worked on railroads, buses, and trucks.
I know I know what you're talking about
I'm
because
forgetting, but-
I was reading
Yeah.
something about it in the Machine of Freedom having to do with the railroads.
Or the same thing with the way in which natural gas and oil was sold and transported. Anyway, I get off the subject a little bit. I just amused me to think this is an example how one thing can affect another, and not always in a way you would like, is that starting in the 80s, it became much more common for senators and U.S. House members to leave Washington on Thursday or Friday, fly home, keep their families at home, do whatever it is they do at home to raise their money for the continuous campaign, and come back on Monday or Monday morning. As a result, they didn't have the sort of family life they used to in Washington. A lot of them don't, where their kids quite naturally tended to, and families quite naturally tended to go to the same schools, frequently live in the same areas,
Right.
be part of the same civil society organizations where they would know each other through their families and children, and be more likely to see the other guy as, well, he's wrong, but he's not, he's not this danger to the republic. Or
not
maybe
the
he's a
enemy.
danger to the republic, but he's not trying to be. He's somebody to be persuaded not to be annihilated. That's one of the things he suggested. Another one is one I think you were also mentioning, and fits in with the Ransberger pivot one, is try to emphasize goals where you can agree on things. Look for rather than looking for areas of disagreement to differentiate yourself, try to find areas where you can work together, or at least you more or less have similar ideas. Like for libertarians, this has been things like working toward marijuana legalization along
Right.
with certain lefties. For righties, it's been various low tax or anti-regulation.
Economic, yeah.
Our
Gun
right
rights
to
or
keep,
something,
gun
yeah.
rights,
Yeah.
things of that nature. That is among the things he mentions. And while I'm talking about activities associated with these guys, I'll mention another one that relates to something I said earlier about the different, the relative proportion to political ideologies among people in the social sciences.
Okay.
And it's called Heterodox Academy, and it's mainly aimed at promoting having different points of view be accepted in the academy. Not what would you call it? Not affirmative action for, or not quotas for
Right.
wingers and libertarians, which, by the way, has been proposed by a few people, but instead just trying to get across that it improves the academy to have diversity of thought as well as diversity of facial coloration
Right.
and facial cartilage and hair texture, which unfortunately is what diversity in the last 5 or 10 years seems to have come to mean.
Right.
In fact, this, as it were, segues into something else I wanted to talk about, which actually is the same sort of thing.
And now is this the other segment, the other part? What is this?
Actually, yes, there's sort of this is sort of a bridge in between the other part.
Okay, well, before we jump to that, let me throw in another segment really
okay,
quick. Yeah, we've got something that we've just recently started. Check it out. All right, buttholes, it's time for your favorite Ancap Barbershop segment, How to Do Drugs with Scott and Adam, your fortnightly dose of drug harm reduction. We are not doctors, and this is not medical advice. This is recorded for use in the future, when drugs are not demonized or prohibited. If drugs are illegal where you live, you should move to a hipper community. All All right, so today, and this comes from harmreduction.org, the Straight Dope series, we're going to be talking about heroin and getting right into it. The heroin you buy on the street, no matter what form, almost always has other stuff in it. Some of these substances are chemicals that come from opium or from the way they make heroin, as in like a byproduct. Others are cuts added to make the dope go farther or change its effect. The cut can change the taste, smell, or high, making it harder to know what you have. More cut means lower purity. The cut has three main effects. You need to spend more money to get high. It's harder to judge your correct dose. And finally, there's a greater chance that you'll have a bad reaction, whether it's the cut alone or the mix. Some cuts have caused irreversible harm or death. No matter how you take your dope, there are three things you can do that will help you a lot. Knowing what you're buying, being flexible with your intake methods, and taking your time getting off. Know what you're buying. Establish a relationship with a dealer you can trust. Before you buy your stuff, ask how it is. And if there's anything you need to know about it, talk to your friends that use. Information you get from them, for other users can save you grief, money, and sometimes your life. Flexibility with your intake methods. A willingness to try other intake methods when your favorite method isn't safe or practical is a simple, effective form of harm reduction. Snorting when you can't find a clean rig can save you from exposure to hepatitis or HIV. Skin popping or muscling when the light is too dim to find a vein can prevent a blown shot. And those are the practices of injecting in the muscle or just under the skin as opposed to going straight into a vein. Taking your time. Rushing to get off leads to mistakes. The more prepared you are, an example, equipment clean and tidy, a well-lit, safe space to get off, a stash that you can quickly get to. The more time you have to deal with the actual process of getting off, no matter how you choose to take your dope. So we're going to start off with snorting, which can lead to nasal damage. It can also cause breathing problems for people who have asthma. Long term, use may eat a hole through your septum, the main cartilage in the nose. Also, sharing straws might expose you to blood and infections like hepatitis B and C. Tips for safer snorting. Choose a place where you can chop up the dope and snort it comfortably. You need a steady hand, and you may drop something if you're snorting while you are standing. You want to avoid snorting your stuff off of a floor, or worse, losing it altogether. Definitely a health risk if you are dope sick and just spent hours getting your drugs. Snort on a clean surface. This may reduce the chances of getting sinus infections or even a cold or flu. If you often snort on the run, laminated plastic cards are perfect since they have a hard surface and are easy to clean. Try to use one that doesn't have your name on it in case you leave it behind. Chop up the heroin well before you snort. The finer it is, the more easily it's absorbed. If you use one nostril more than the other and notice that it's getting sore, switch nostrils. This may lessen the chance of infection or long-term damage. Keep your snorting tubes clean and try not to share them. Hepatitis B and C might be transmitted by contaminating snorting equipment. Avoid using old dollar bills, especially in the winter flu/cold season. Or if you have AIDS, they're full of germs. Magazine or heavy writing paper is a good alternative. Put a few drops of water in your nose when you're done. It aids absorption of the drugs and relieves irritation of your nasal passages. You can also use saline solution available in drugstores. Smoking may cause problems for people with asthma and other respiratory conditions. There have also been health risks related to smoking off of aluminum, although none of these have been proven yet. Choose your smoking method according to the type of heroin you have. White powder works best in cigarettes. White brown base and tar smoke well on foil. If you're chasing, using a foil instead of a straw or rolled up bill as you smoke heroin will collect on the inside, and you can save this as an emergency stash. Use a small flame. High heat destroys the dope, and a smaller flame allows it to cook more slowly and evenly, making it easier to inhale all of the fumes. Also, be careful with throwaway lighters. The metal rim at the top heats up fast and can burn your fingers. Don't hold the smoke in your lungs. It won't make you higher and may increase irritation to your lungs. If you have asthma, make sure you have your inhaler or other asthma medications handy. Smoking and snorting too can bring on asthma attacks. And we're not going to have time to get into injecting today. And it's probably worth noting that both smoking and snorting heroin are in general going to be a little bit safer than injecting. You absolutely 100% can overdose on heroin, by snorting it. So if you have friends telling you that's not the case, don't listen to them. I'm going to go ahead and my personal opinion on heroin is something you should probably 100% just stay away from. I'm not going to tell you what to do. If you do it, be safe, but it's not something that I can, say this is a good thing to go do, in the backyard when you ain't got nothing going on. I can't recommend heroin. What do you think, Adam?
I'm right there with you. Although I've never done it and Pro isn't going to plan on doing it, but you made me feel prepared to do it.
Oh, well, that's great.
I guess if I do it now, I know how to.
Alan, are you going to be the contrarian and endorse heroin?
No. Except possibly as part of the famous Brompton cocktail, but that's you need to study the history of hospices in Britain. Actually, I think there are better drugs now for the people who are on their last legs, who are need pain reduction when they're have only a few months to live. But actually. But it does demonstrate, actually, as Ron Paul, former Libertarian Party candidate, one of the more admirable things he did. There was a drug some years ago, and I'm trying to remember what it was called.
Fentanyl?
RU 435 or 445. It was an abortifacient. It was, well, actually, it wasn't an abortifacient. It was an abortifacient. It was a early term abortifacient, if I remember correctly.
Hold on. Define just roughly abortifacient.
I may have mispronounced it.
We've buried the lead. I've never heard that before. Abortifacient.
A drug that causes abortion.
Okay.
A drug that causes miscarriage.
Right. Understand now.
Now, remember, Ron Paul, for religious reasons, utterly opposed abortion.
Right.
But he also had it's a little more complex than that, but he also had the libertarian idea, which you demonstrated right here. This is one of the things you notice about libertarians. And a lot of folks don't really quite understand this. There's a general assumption that if you like something like museums or people staying together, not getting divorced, that therefore you want to make divorce illegal and force people to the point of a gun.
There ought to be a law.
Yeah, ought to be a law. Libertarian attitude is you have your opinions, but what you think is what you prefer, there's no direct correlation between that and what the law should be.
And to take that even a step further, like with something that may be a legitimate, like kind of a moral gray area or dilemma, like I am 100% politically pro-choice. I'm fairly pro-life, especially for an atheist, as far as personally. Whatever you believe as far as when the ghost enters the shell or whatever you believe, about abortion, at the end of the day, I'm not willing to go to my neighbor's house and kill them for it or put them in a cage for it. So I'm not going to delegate that right to somebody else and wash my hands of it,
Well, the general libertarian idea, if it's a gray area, err on the side of less force. About the reason
I tend to agree with that, but
I was just mentioning go back to the Ron Paul story. Paul, when folks tried to make that drug illegal in the United States because its only known use was for abortion, said, no. The fact that you might say that a gun mainly intended for self-defense, well, let's make that illegal because it's only intended for killing people.
Right.
His statement was, it may have some other use. We don't know yet. As with heroin, until better drugs became available, combined with, as it happens, cocaine, for people at the Brompton
speedballing is what that's called.
It was at one time used at hospices in Britain as a way of providing pain reduction combined with a certain degree of alertness for people who were going to die so soon that they weren't going to get addicted. Right. Nowadays, there are better ways of doing it, but that was what was available at the time. But the point there is that the fact that a particular drug is available, even if there are good reasons to be in favor of the legality of something, even if you personally despise the main use of it.
Right.
As in the case of Ron Paul and this and this abortion drug. So I'm sorry, I just sort of pulled off what you're saying.
No. And reason number one is just being a decent human being and not like telling other people what to do if they're not hurting you or stealing from you.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about Ron Paul is that it was his personal belief to be against abortion, but he didn't let that stand in between, like his consistent moral philosophy that he wanted to.
And I think that's the issue. Like I know the couple of LP things like that I've been at where you're kind of evangelizing, you know, or whatever. You're talking to people that have no idea what this shit is. A lot of them around here, the first thing they do is you're a political party. What's your stance on abortion? Well, we don't want to make laws. Bye-bye. Like, that's all I need to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough issue, and I think there are ways to handle it that I don't know if we need to go into here. Actually, though, what we were just talking about, I'm an inventive person. I can always find a relationship.
The expert segueist.
Well, the bad side of it is, of course, I tend to digress into things. I was talking about trying to play off of the ideas associated with Hyde and Company's civilpolitics.org about ideas on what we can do to disagree more successfully. Now, one thing Hyde and Company mentions, and this is more his opinion necessarily than mine, but it's first off recognizing that the insights of people who are different than you might actually be useful.
Right.
And that's a really hard one. Now he gives I'm looking at his book here where he was addressing, he decided, since these are the folks he did the most research on,
right.
American conservatives, liberals, and libertarians. Hooray, we're number 3. But we're actually being noticed.
Right.
These were things he thought that liberals have an insight on that libertarians and conservatives tend to have a bias against.
Right.
That he thought were useful. Although I think he's actually showing his own liberal bias that he doesn't understand our libertarian, at least, hatred of crony capitalism.
Right.
And that is that governments can restrain corporations that gain powers beyond what.
Wait, I thought we worshipped corporations.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, let's have government control monopolies and let
the legal definition of a corporation basically being a business entity that conducts itself at the leisure of the state, or basically something that doesn't exist in an anarcho-capitalist libertarian society.
Another one, and this is a painful one, is to suggest that some problems are amenable to regulation, and this is one, of course, that anarcho-capitalists actually, of which, well, I'll get into that later. Have pretty good answers to, but
right.
Nevertheless, they give the example, and the main one is a difficult one, and that is air pollution and water pollution. That's fairly ubiquitous.
Right.
How do you handle that? And his point is that there is considerably less lead in the average American person nowadays.
Right.
Partly because lead's been taken out of gasoline and out of paint. As I said, there are anarcho-capitalist ways of dealing with that, but the point is that that's a form of regulation that actually did something fairly useful.
Right, right.
It gives an example of libertarians. I don't need to go into this very much because I presumably have a mostly libertarian audience, and that is
I would think so.
The astonishing ability of markets to organize people across long distances and create goods and services that people want. That, if we study at all what things were like for the average person before we had widespread market economies, it was just nasty, brutish, and short for almost everyone except for maybe a few lucky people, particularly the richer folks, and even they didn't live that long and suffered pain, a lot more pain than we do. The other one gets into is a conservative insight, and this actually relates to the one you mentioned earlier about the social usefulness. He's not, talking about the truth or falsity of it in order to avoid, on the one hand, annoying his lefty atheist folks, and the other hand, annoying the conservative folks. And he also hopes to, get greater understanding through this. Right. And of course, they're not all religions aren't always necessarily left versus right, but frequently they are in America currently.
Sure.
And that is that there is such a thing as moral capital, social moral capital. Some of these things make people, the idea, like, for example, when you're with a bunch of folks whom you think are rather similar to yourself and similar outlooks, there is good evidence that you're more likely to engage in a so-called eusocial way. You're less likely to steal things, more likely to help the average person around you than you would otherwise. This is a really uncomfortable one for some folks because there's actually fairly good statistical evidence that if you have a great deal of diversity of religion or ethnicity or culture in an area, that people become that they become less sociable, less civil to each other. Indeed, that's been given as a reason why you have such support for one of the reasons why you have such support for the welfare state in the until very recently extremely homogenous Scandinavian countries. And there has been actually some erosion for the welfare state there as they've become less homogenous.
Right.
And so his point is that not necessarily that everybody has to be the same race or the same religion, but having a shared moral outlook, the sort of thing where, when the Boy Scouts say their basic creed, just about everybody would say, yeah, or something along those lines, that sort of society can exist actually with greater economic efficiency. It's been pointed out by a good many folks that various very closed-off religious groups can have economic advantages. The paradigmatic example are Orthodox Jews and the diamond trade. You have people carrying these little stones worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they pass them around, look them over, do stuff with, by most standards, wild abandon.
Right.
They don't have photographs. They don't have a whole bunch of contracts. They just, you're out of the society if you transgress in any major way.
Right.
That this, and it's all, and the fact that it's also connected up with a pretty all-encompassing religion is one of the things that helps these folks work together. And what's his name? I believe it's Thomas Sowell has done academic work on various ethnicities that, like the Chinese in Malaysia, Indians in East Africa, where you have ethnic groups that have been unusually successful economically, partly because they deal among themselves with folks of similar cultures. Whom they intermarry with practice basically the same religion, and so they are more able to accomplish things, which for your average libertarian or liberal is an uncomfortable thing to think about.
Right.
But nevertheless, there's again really good evidence that is so. Now, what you do with it is an interesting question, but it's worth recognizing.
I think I understand it. It seems like there would be some more efficiency if everybody kind of has the same goals. You know what I mean?
Right.
Everybody's working on the same project. There's less fluff,
Yeah.
less waste, less, like fidget spinners and stuff like that in that type of economy.
And folks, would be looked down upon for, being disloyal to and degrading themselves by doing the wrong thing. To refer to those moral foundations. This segues into, and this connects to the next thing I was talking about, and that is something this is really more me blathering on, but I think it's not too different from what other people have said. Being a computer science guy and a libertarian and a modern American science fiction reader, of course I look at everything technologically.
Right.
If I was some medieval guy, I'd probably, medieval nobleman, I'd be thinking of it in terms of some religious or some knightly order or something is the way in which to describe things.
Right.
We use the metaphors we're used to. And this would be social technology that helps people work together in various ways. One of them mentioned is shared moral values, sometimes really helped along by exclusive religions. Another is those two we mentioned about looking for shared goals and, consciously emphasizing shared goals and consciously trying to engage with other people in a face-to-face, hopefully, but at the very least a human level, treating them like, fellow people.
Right.
Other social technologies are actually a little more abstract and so are a little easier for a libertarian to talk about. One of them, you can almost hear our founding fathers of our country, think about this if you read things they're talking about, because these guys, remember, they were only a century or so away from the religious wars of the 1600s, the 17th century, which you may remember the 30 Years' War. I think I was reading something like decrease the population of Germany, or what's now Germany, by around 30 or 40%. I mean, you had people who were followers of the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ. Although you said I can't offend anyone, if I describe some of the tortures they did to each other with things like the pear, which when you turn a little screw widens it out, and with the boots and the other things.
Wait. Where does the pear go now?
The pear is it's shaped more or less like a pear, and when you turn a screw on the back, it sort of opens up like a flower.
You're not being specific.
I think you can guess what you can do.
Okay, so real quick, because you just brought something to the forefront of my mind that I forgot to bring up when we did our doing drugs with Scott and Adam segment, is a perfectly viable and probably pretty safe way to take heroin and some other drugs would be to do what is called boofing. Are either of you guys familiar with
No,
that?
I'm not familiar with that word.
No,
Okay,
lay it on,
okay,
dude.
so that would be if you take a syringe and definitely take the needle off of it, and whatever the drug is, make sure it's mixed well with some saline or some water, and then you put it up the booty hole and pop it right up in there, boofing. And you can also do that with cocaine in a straw, and you blow it up in there, and
Neat.
that's
Not
a
that
thing.
you recommend any of these things.
My
Actually,
sister, my elder sister taught me that whenever I was like 14.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not taught me, like showed me, but explained it to me to somebody who had never heard that before.
Well, it's useful. Knowledge is useful even if you aren't going to use it.
That's right.
And I think that's when I'm
Prime
sure I'm
example.
not, yeah. Although I have read of people doing that with alcohol, and that is a way to kill yourself.
Yeah.
That sounds straight up dangerous as hell.
Yeah.
It does kill people from time
Right.
to time. Just because, as we all know, alcohol is the most commonly overdosed recreational drug, whereas that's virtually impossible with something like marijuana. Not that I don't, I'm not a recommender of any of those.
I will say go and smoke cannabis every day.
He
if
is
that's
a
what you-
recommender, yeah.
I will recommend
Scott
that.
will,
That is one of, like, I don't know, maybe 2 drugs that I will, like, through the course of this be like, this is fine, whatever.
Okay, well, I don't. I'm don't like getting smoke in my lungs, for one thing.
Right.
But
Fair enough.
anyway, but remember, libertarian. The fact I don't do it doesn't mean I want to
Edibles for
hurt
Alan
anybody else.
Barksdale.
No, but in any event, I can get hypomanic all by myself. I'm lucky with my native brain chemicals. A little bit of an amusing digression. You have followers of a pretty friendly religion, Christianity,
Right.
doing truly horrible things to each other over, in this case, relatively minor versions of one subsegment of Christianity, Western Christianity. We're not even talking Orthodox or the ancient Church of Ethiopia or of the East. We're talking just Western Civ's version of Christianity.
Right.
The folks who are the heirs of the Western Roman Empire doing utterly horrible things to each other in the name of Jesus. And these fellows are looking at it and say, this just is not right. And thought of, well, actually, they weren't the first ones. The Dutch Republic did it more early and successfully. But Americans, of course, took foreign stuff and did it better.
Right.
And the social technology is the one we're all familiar, we all know and love, freedom of religion. If you get the government out of religion, and of course a libertarian would say that's true of lots of other things, including education.
Right.
Once you take the one-size-fits-all taxpayer-supported aspect of it, you get rid of a whole lot of things people get angry and hateful at each other. Because if you think as it apparently, based on everything they thought, many people in the world now and most people in Europe for a long time thought that it just didn't make any sense for the state not to have and enforce a particular religion. Once you get this really interesting twist on things,
Right.
where you have a civil law separate from the religious law, and your religions can operate fairly freely, then a lot of the things people kill each other just poof, go away. That's one of the more successful examples of social technology, how you can have actual policies that really improve human life. But I mean, it's just a different way of looking at it. A lot of the other things that we like, rule of law, which can, as we know, be created independent of the state.
Sure.
Although I'm inclined to think that I'm of the road to anarchism is through minarchism. That just as the concept of money started off with these little physical tokens that turned into more symbolic things, and after a
Right.
while, you built your castle in the air, and you can get rid of the foundations, and the thing actually works.
Yeah.
Because it's actually a symbol exchange system, really, rather than its main usefulness is a symbol exchange system. That something similar occurs with the rule of law. That is that having a fairly objective way with some third party to decide disputes really makes people less likely to kill each other when they're doing it. As we famously see, I mean, I'm preaching the converted when we talk about, the alcohol, the way in which different purveyors of alcohol dealt with their disputes in the 1930s or before the end of Prohibition,
Right.
and the way they do it now. Death versus, let's go to court.
Yeah.
And some way of getting popular opinion on things. It doesn't have to be pure democracy, but some way to get, hopefully, some degree of popular consent, which in a better system, you would have some way you could, voluntarist system, you could volunteer for your particular patchwork anarchy, like Nazikian. I don't know if you've read Anarchy, State, and Utopia. Another good book written by a honest-to-goodness major league philosopher as a response to, great, I getting late in the day and I hadn't eaten enough. That's my excuse.
Right.
Another very influential book on political philosophy.
Right.
Nozick was, who was, I think, at Harvard at that point. It's essentially a defense of libertarianism, and in particular, anarcho-libertarianism, from a philosophical level, and comes to various conclusions, but essentially in favor of voluntarist enclaves with various relationships between them to allow them to interact with each other. And you can read the book if you want to get more.
I'm curious.
Yes, I will say that while it's accessible to the average person, it's not quite the, hey, I like science fiction, I like this too, of reading The Machinery of Freedom by David Friedman. Great book. Any event, so I was mentioning democracy is our current very imperfect way, voluntarism being probably a better way of getting folks to sort of go along with what sort of government they're living under.
Right.
The last thing I'll mention, since we're getting on time, is what I think is one of the themes of American culture, just something I noticed a while ago. And I think we do it more than most other countries. And I just noticed it's all over the place. And it's one of those things like in the days of the Roman Republic, the way in which they would decide things, oddly enough, is that you divide people up into various electoral groups, possibly with different numbers of people in each one to give richer people more power.
Of course.
And you would make the electoral groups always be an odd number. Maybe it'll be 13, maybe 17, whatever. And then you'd start at the one with the rich guys and then do each electoral group in order. And then when you get to a majority electoral vote, or when you get to the end because it's odd, you'll have a decision.
Right.
That's just the way that's the way their culture worked, and that's the way they did lots of different stuff before the empire came around. I think the sort of American way of doing it, and other folks obviously do it as well, but this is more ingrained in our culture, is the idea of channeling our natural competition, working with human nature and against it, into useful activity by means of rules. Now, an obvious thing is I'm not really a sports fan, but the way sports works. You have some rules, people follow it, and you're obviously doing the wrong thing if you break them. But within that, you not only have fun, you have an area in which you can try to excel. You try to do the best you can within those rules, and obviously you're doing the wrong thing if you break a rule.
Right.
Now, in that case, it's mainly giving you something, fun to do with each other and a way of having solidarity with your fellow person.
Sure.
One of those bits of civil society that ties us together. But other areas, we see this happening. For example, the American-style legal system. In some other places, it's more led by the judge or by the local procurator, who is, he's going to go with the evidence. I mean, ideally,
Right.
he's he is tries to be objective, tries to be as fair as possible, and he's going to go where the evidence lead him and try and come up with as wise a decision as he can. Sounds good. American decision is we have these characters called lawyers, and we have this adversarial system where they are not supposed to try to be fair to each other. They
Right.
are fighting it out, except in the case of criminal, there were special rules because of the power of the state,
Right.
with a prosecutor supposedly supposed to allow exculpatory evidence to the other guy, but as we know, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
But usually. But in both civil and criminal cases, our way of doing it is that they're not supposed to try to be fair. They are fighting it out
Right.
for their guy. And that, if you know any lawyers or watch them, particularly when they're those who actually go to the court, they engage all of their passions.
Yeah.
And our way of doing it is you've got the judge up there and a whole lot of rules under which they operate that are aimed at keeping them from going outside and lying too much or
Right.
bringing in false evidence. But because they're fighting against each other, they bring out, you hope, assuming they're relatively equally matched,
Right.
they bring out all of the evidence more so than a single guy who's supposed to be wise, but certainly going to have particular biases. And he's probably not going to be motivated to find out every single possible thing
Yeah.
for his side.
Exactly.
That's sort of our thought on how a legal system to work. And another obvious one, most obvious one, economics. In our sort of system, you don't rely on the people doing things for traditional reasons. You don't rely on the king telling you how to, and the feudal system telling you what to do,
Right.
or central planning. Ideally, at least, we have a bunch of people pursuing profit, making money, but within a system, hopefully, ideally, that prevents them from engaging in our favorite, force or fraud.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Ideally, obviously, frequently it doesn't. But to the degree that it does so,
Mm-hmm.
you have the amazing productivity and the amazing working togetherness of modern economies. Like where I work,
Mm-hmm.
I work with people from all over the world in a software development company, and I'm pretty sure in fact, I know many of them come from traditional enemies. And occasionally you may see a little, like the Auburn versus Alabama traditional
Right.
enemies, or others more ancient. But so what? We're there to make money.
Right.
As Adam Smith famously put it, and I can't quote it exactly, it was, seldom is a man more innocently and productively engaged than in the process of making money honestly, against the folks who just look down on commercialism. It's not just, it motivates people to work together and do useful stuff.
Right.
But what needs to be done is you have some way of keeping that desire within the bounds of not engaging in cheating, not engaging in stealing, not engaging in getting the government to say lay a tariff on your foreign competitors,
Right.
or put licensure to keep other guys out of your business. You try to have one where people engage their desire for status and money, but it's aimed toward productivity, and the productivity, the only way it can be successful is providing goods and services other people want. We do it in let's see, what would it be? In a sense, we're doing it, this in traditional marriage.
Mhm.
That is, folks' desire for togetherness and easily available sexuality
Right.
is channeled by fairly strong social pushes to stay true to each other, unless, of course, you're
Mm-hmm.
outliers who have made agreements for an open marriage.
Non-ethical non-ethical non-monogamy.
Yeah, something
I had
that
to
sort.
think of the
But
what it was.
other than a pretty small percentage of the population, these sort of impulses are channeled by means of a social pressure for married folks to stay together.
Right.
That's a little bit weaker example, but it's an example of this. Well, that's
he-
really more the channeling. That's not really the competition aspect.
Yeah, so I think this works perfectly with what you're saying, if I'm understanding it. Dave Smith, the comic and libertarian political dude, commentator, whatever, he has a metaphor, and he just uses it to explain kind of, I don't know, one of the more amazing things that the market does, which is to bring people with different goals together because they're working on a similar goal, right? Okay. So he says, he's a Jewish guy. He says, I want a ride home. I call an Uber, I call a cab, whatever it is. And some guy some Muslim guy comes up and I don't want to say anything about cab drivers, but it works well with the metaphor, who likely, in a different scenario, they might hate each other. They come from completely different cultures. They have completely different backgrounds. But at the end of the day, Dave values the ride more than his $5, and the cabbie values the $5 more than the ride. So they work together, and they're happy about it. And they say, "Hey, brother, thanks. You have a good one, man. Be good, whatever." And because they both want the good and service more than what they already have.
It's interesting because you see a lot of people who are enemies of capitalism painted as something that really oppresses people, but really when you bring a common goal like gaining capital, it really brings everyone together.
Yeah.
But of course, when we talk we always have to remember that, just like that lefty person I was talking about, who I was discussing Mr. Haidt's idea, so her image of the right wing is the nastiest, most hateful right-wing person you can think of. For a lot of people, when they say capitalism or even free markets, they think nasty crony capitalism in league with the state to oppress people.
Right.
So, but anyway.
We have to change the culture.
Yep.
Have to spread the good ideas.
Yeah. And I don't know, I was presenting these as social technology. The market, of course, is a very important one, but this is just an observation of American culture, which may be one reason for the relative success of our civilization, and that is the idea of working with human nature rather than against it, using fairly objective rules to channel our primal impulses towards status and getting the girl and what have you into useful activity. So that was the other thing I wanted to talk about, which really, as you can see, sort of plays into the
I completely think so.
Neat.
Well, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I don't think so.
Well, I just want to say that I greatly appreciate you coming on with us, Alan, and I always enjoy talking to you, and we don't get to do it enough. And I feel like this is going to be one that I'm going to go back and re-listen to 4 or 5 times. I usually listen. I listen to it when I edit it, and then I'll still listen to the episode a couple times after that. But I think it's going to take me a little bit to get everything. There are a lot of really subtle jokes that some of them I know Adam didn't even get that you threw in there that were really intelligent. That it's going to be. See, the gears are turning. We'll watch. Oh yeah, and we don't just have to listen. We can watch the YouTube video. As I'm assuming that camera over there is still recording. We are going to have some YouTube. So go smash that sumbitchin' like button. That's what you're supposed to say. Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah. Honestly.
Is there anything you want to plug as far as a website or
I've mentioned
contact?
several things along the way. Libertarian Party, for all of its faults, which anarcho-capitalists certainly know about, nevertheless is the organization, the party organization that at least tries to push for one form of social technology, that is lessening the freer markets. And I mentioned a couple of interesting websites already, like the yourmorals.org. If you're interested in a book-length description of the sort of thing I was talking about social intuitionism, I'll say it again. It's The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, Haidt.
Here, let me see. I'll show it to the camera. This is the book.
Yeah. Not a be-all and an end-all, but it's, as I said, and didn't really change my life, but at this point, something that changes the way I look at the world, it's welcome.
Great. Well, all right. Well, once again, just like to extend a thank you to you. And there are costs associated with the production of the Ancap Barber Shop, and we would like to bring you more content. If you would like to help us out, we conveniently offer an abundance of avenues to do so. You can buy an Ancap Barbershop t-shirt, make a one-time or recurring donation through Bitcoin, give a per-episode donation of as little as $1 an episode using Patreon, or even advertise on the Ancap Barbershop. Flex your free market muscles and go to ancapbarbershop.com. You can also find us on facebook.com/ancapbarbershop, Twitter and IG at ancapbarber, or send us an email at feedback@ancapbarbershop.com. And I'll have to revise this to include the YouTube channel. We love hearing from our listeners, and if you're not an asshole, we might even shout you out on the show. So that has been it, episode 22. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Worms.
This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.
Cool. That's a podcast we just recorded.
Neat.